story with, oh no, Shannon, thank you. You guys didn't miss anything important. Don't worry about it. It's gonna end up just distracting more. So you settle in and don't worry about it. It's okay. I put my glasses on. All right, let's come back. So imagine that this is the universe expanding. It's always growing and expanding. Hard to characterize ether. It's a very abstract concept, but in this balloon, obviously there's air, but there's also space. And inside our body, there's actually a whole lot more space than we realize. There's a slide next that I'm going to read to you that talks about the cells and actually how much space is in the cells in our body cavities. We need space in our mind to be able to create new ideas. Ether is a connection to the spiritual realm. When we're connected to that element, we're connected with source, whatever you want to call that. People that have more ether in them tend to be more esoteric, more spiritual. We'll get into that when we get into the doshas. Think of it as like the collective consciousness and the vibrations that go through that. It shows up as an excess and being out of balance when you have, let's say, too much in your stomach, it could create gas. Too much in your head, you feel spacey, you feel not focused. Ways that you can get rid of excess ether is by doing grounding methods. So the opposite of being up here, being in the ethers, is being on the earth, having your feet planted. What we just did just a minute ago, planting our feet and connecting, is a way to counterbalance that. So some examples of grounding things: something that comes from the earth, anything from the earth, directly in the earth, a food like a sweet potato, any kind of root vegetable, it's going to be more grounding. You guys probably intuitively know that, and you might not think of that as medicine, but think about when you're just super scattered and you need something to just bring you down. Putting your feet on the earth, eating a root vegetable, drinking some nourishing broth or soup, holding a tiger's eye stone, putting on some cedarwood oil. There's all kinds of different ways you can impact change in that situation to help yourself. So next element is air. So here's a little quote. This was Eckhart Tolle. It was a book that I was reading a while ago, The Power of Now, and I just thought this was a cool quote. So he calls it space instead of ether, but it's the same thing. Space, just as no sound can exist without silence, nothing can exist without no thing, without the empty space that enables it to be. Every physical object or body has come out of nothing, is surrounded by nothing, and will eventually return to nothing. Not only that, but even inside every physical body, there is far more nothing than something. Physicists tell us that the solidity of matter is an illusion. Even seemingly solid matter, including your physical body, is nearly 100% empty space. So vast are the distances between the atoms compared to their size. What is more, even inside every atom, there is mostly empty space. What is left is more like a vibrational frequency than particles of solid matter, more like a musical note. Buddhists have known that for over 2,500 years. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, states the Heart Sutra, one of the best known ancient Buddhist texts, the essence of all. So next we get air. And actually, I forgot to tell you the characteristics of ether, and this is kind of important. There's a set of qualities that we assign to each of the elements and each of the doshas, which we'll get to later. The ones for ether are light. You can imagine ether being very light, dry, cold, clear, subtle, meaning not tangible. You can't hold it. And expansive, just like the balloon was expansive, just like the universe is expansive. So those are the qualities that we assign to ether. Now with air, it's all of the same qualities, all of those that I just mentioned. It has the same characteristics, but it adds in motion. It's mobile, just like that dandelion blowing. Another quality that is air is rough. That one's kind of weird. I had a hard time wrapping my brain around that, but my teacher said, well, think about it when you're at the beach or you're somewhere cold and the wind is whipping at you. It's whipping at your face. It feels hard. It feels sharp. So that's a quality it can have in that way. and we can see the air move. We can feel it. We can even hear it sometimes. You can hear it rustling the leaves in the tree. So have a little feather here to represent that. You can see the effect of air. It's creating movement. Movement is important in the body. It's important in the mind. And we'll see how that affects us as a person when that's a part of our makeup. And by the way, I wanted to say too that all of these elements are within all of us. I think I said that before. They're just at varying degrees. So when we get into dosha later, you're going to wonder, which am I? Am I ether and air? Am I fire and water? Am I earth and water? You're all of them. You just want to think about which one affects you the most, which one takes you out of balance the most, so that you can know how to counterbalance that. So another thing to think about with air that's important in our bodies is respiration. It's that movement of prana, and it is all of the movements in our body. Anything that's creating movement is controlled by air, and the dosha of vata, which we'll get to in a minute. It's the nerve impulses sending sensations and thoughts through our brains, our muscles, moving through a series of yoga postures, for example. That movement element is super important to us. Obviously, that keeps us well. If we were all earth all the time and completely stable and static, we would not be healthy. We need all of these elements in us. Too much air in the body, feeling scattered, poor digestion. Some ways to counter that is ginger, for example, which is a root, again, kind of like the sweet potato, that will stimulate our digestive fire. I'm going to talk about digestive fire a lot, and sometimes I'll use the word agni. Agni is a secondary word for digestive fire. It means the same thing. It's literally our stomach acids, but it's also metaphorically other things too. It's our ability to transform things. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. And ashwagandha is another balancing root to help if you've got too much air in the body. So as we add to the elements, we've got fire up next. As the air moves more quickly, we get friction and heat, creating the element of fire. I'll try not to set off the fire alarms we did last year. So think about fire. What qualities does it have? Its primary quality is heat. Yes, it has other qualities as well. It moves, so it's got some mobility to it. It's light, it's subtle. We don't want to try to hold it. Sharp is easy to imagine with fire, because obviously you put your hand to it, you'll feel its sharp qualities. And the dosha that is mostly fire is very sharp in being smart, sharp in being like cutting sometimes. So we'll talk about that a bit more as we get into the doshas, but its main thing is its heat. The heat is the primary thing that we want to focus on when we think about fire. So the fire element, as I said a minute ago, digestive fire, our agni, is hugely important in Ayurveda. The health of our agni is indicative of our overall health. If you don't have healthy digestion, it's going to affect all the other processes. This is also, the fire element in our body is also all of our metabolic processes, our ability to convert food into energy, how well and efficiently we do that. It's in the sharpness of our mind. It's in like the spark of an idea. If you have too much heat in your body, let's say, gosh, there's a lot of heat out right now. This is definitely something we're all experiencing, excess heat. I am usually a very soft, calm person, but man, I've wanted to punch some people lately, and I know it's just the heat like getting to me. So I purposely drank some hibiscus and some lavender before I came to just try to like cool down. Some other cooling things, cucumbers on the eyes can feel really nice. Rose water is very soothing and cooling. It's a really good one to counterbalance this and calm irritability. Aloe vera, if you've got skin irritation, obviously can be very good. Just something, something that will bring down that heat. So the next element, so I like to think of it, if the fire is causing the air to rise, obviously hot air rises, it then becomes dense in the cloud formations, and then water rains down and is created. So that's our fourth element, another really important one. We think of having a lot of water in the body. We didn't probably think of having a lot of space in the body, but we have a lot of both. So what are some of the new elements we're adding in here? This one is tangible, right? We can hold it, and it's filling up a container. It's also moving. It kind of goes with the flow, if you will. And it's obviously liquid. So liquid is a big part of our body. Having adequate liquids in our body keeps us healthy. In Chinese medicine, we call those the yin nourishing fluids. Those are important to us, especially as we get older. They're in our synovial fluids. So when we do yoga, when we move our joints, we're lubricating those lubricating that synovial fluid, stimulating it, stimulating the lymphatic system. That's another form of liquid in the body, our saliva, obviously urine, things like that. And if those systems are out of whack, obviously you can get things like swelling, edema, respiratory congestion. Things start to become too moist and swamp-like, and we don't want that sitting in the body. So if you've got some of those things, you know, doing some herbs like dandelion tea or something heating to like liquefy that mucus that's sitting in the lungs to get it out, is like cayenne pepper is a good idea. Garlic, cardamom, those will all heat up the excess mucus in the lungs and help you expel it. If you've got too much water in the body and you just are holding on to it, things that are astringent, you can eat astringent foods like pomegranate and chickpeas. So you'll see a lot with Ayurveda. The medicine is in the daily habits, as I've said. It's also in the food. Even a lot of the herbs that we recommend in Ayurveda are just cooked with in the food. So it's not necessarily like you're going out of your way to take some extra supplements. You're putting it into your food. It's a part of your daily life, and you're trying to find balance in that. And there's a word up here that we use for water that might need some explanation, unctuous. I don't think I'd talk about that too much more in this class, but I talk about it a lot when it comes to Vata. Vata needs unctuous things. That basically is like a combination of oily and liquid. So things like broth is a good example of that. I think that's all I was going to say about that. So then the last element, probably the easiest to identify with, the least subtle, the most dense, is of course earth. This was from a Montessori lesson we did on composition of the earth and the different layers. So definitely much more tangible and solid, right? It's got a heaviness to it. It's got some structure to it. It's literally the structure of our body, our bones, our muscles, what holds us up. It's also, in a more abstract way, it's that feeling of connectedness, that feeling, you know, when you feel you need to feel grounded. It's that feeling connected to the earth, feeling stable, feeling even. Static is another word that is used to describe it. Cool. You think about the sticking your hand down into the dirt and that cooling, grounding quality that it has a roughness to it. So if we have too much of that, let's think about that for a second. If we aren't moving, we were talking about how movement's important, and we don't want just pure inertia, pure stuckness. What might happen? Say that again. Stagnation. That's a Chinese word that we use. Yeah, things just sit, they pool, it becomes kind of like the swamp, metaphorically. And you know, you might get depressed. You might just feel sluggish. You might, you know, you need things that are opposite of that. You need things that are stimulating. You need things that are light. So foods that are light instead of foods that are heavy when you're feeling that way. It tends to be not what we want to gravitate towards when we're feeling like that, but it's what brings us back into balance. So these are all of the words that I've said through here that have been on the slides, and this is just a breakdown of them in a different format. They're called the gunas. They're 10 pairs of opposites, and all of those elements have a variety of them within them. They don't all contain all of these. Okay. When I get into the pairing of the elements, which are called doshas, these are going to apply to those as well, and you'll start to see it less as an abstract idea and more like how this presents in the body. Rough skin, dry skin as well. Feeling hot, you see some inflammation. You've got acne. Heavy, feeling sedentary, like we said, feeling depressed. Cloudy urine, you have a UTI. You can see how they can physically manifest. So as I was saying about the elements, they have combinations in Ayurveda called dosha. You probably heard that word before, but if you haven't, I'll explain. We have ether and air, which are the two most subtle qualities combined together to form Vata. Vata is the first dosha. The second dosha is a combination of fire and water. So all of those qualities that I've mentioned along the way of those elements are now combined to form something new, a new pattern, basically. Fire and water together is Pitta, and water and earth together is Kapha. And we will unpack what that looks like, how that presents as a person, how it presents as a quality. I wanted to say first that for all of us, we have a constitution, a unique recipe of these different elements that we were born with, or we like to think of it as actually from conception. So at conception, there was a certain makeup. You might have had, if you want to get mathy about it, you might have had 25%, earth and 10% ether and so on and so on. You had a certain makeup in you, a certain set of constitutional qualities that were established. But then you were born and things happened to you. You had outside energetic influences that would send you in one direction or another. So Prakriti is our original conception blueprint, our dosha from birth, from conception. And then Vakriti, you can see them highlighted here. They're the ones in purple. That's our current state of affairs, and that can change. So your Vikriti 2 years ago might be different than your Vikriti now. It's usually one dosha that's plaguing you the most, but they can all send you out of balance at various times, depending on what's going on in your life. So it's influenced by what we eat, obviously. I wrote consume. So this is an important concept in Ayurveda. It's not just what we eat. We're not just eating food and digesting it in our stomach. I think I said this to you the other day too, Devon. Senses are huge in Ayurveda, tending to all of our sensory organs, because it's not just about what we're eating. We're consuming all day. We're consuming with our ears, we're consuming with our eyes, with our skin. All of our sensory organs are taking things in, taking in influences. So our ability to process those out properly, not hold on to things that are not helpful, to let them go, to cleanse those sense organs. If your eyes are overused from looking at a computer screen all day, or you've just been completely overstimulated in your nervous systems, it's too much. You need something grounding to bring you back down. So tending to those sense organs is a big thing in Ayurveda. In our daily seasonal tools and rituals class, we talk a lot about those tools, like rose water for the eyes, neti and nausea for the nose. And I won't be able to take the time to explain all of those to you today, but just know that it's not just about what you're eating that influences you. It's also about what you're consuming, what you're experiencing and putting yourself around. The energy of the people around you is also hugely impactful. So that's part of our medicine too, is being aware of that. So Ayurveda's job, our goal in Ayurveda, the tools that it offers, is to bring us back to that original state, back closer to what our original blueprint was. So if you were ever to do a consultation with an Ayurvedic practitioner, that's something that I do offer to help you try to figure that out. I would ask a series of questions about what you were like as a child. You obviously can't remember conception, but you can remember elementary school. So we go back there and we look at all of those different influences and what you were like there. And so you may have varying degrees, varying levels of dosha at that time. And your Prakriti is what we want to try to get back to. It's not that you want to try to get all of the elements balanced, in proportion. That's not necessarily balance for you. That's not necessarily your energetic makeup. So you're just wanting to get back to where you should be without those influences on you. And that way we can live out our dharma. So samskaras is similar to what I was just talking about with the senses. They're impressions. It's a big part of Ayurveda is thinking about the mental impressions that our experiences leave upon us. So everything that's happening, it's almost like if you imagine your brain is a mold of clay, and that everything that happens to you just touches with a little fingerprint there as you experiencing everything. So psychological imprints, that's us taking in all of those things. All right, so now we're going to unpack Vata. Vata types are pretty easy to spot. They are super energetic and bubbly. Bubble is the illustration I like to use for Vata, because if we remember ether and air together, it was light it was dry, it was cool, and it was mobile. Think about the qualities of these bubbles, the energy they bring. Do they bring joy? They bring lightness? They do. Vatas do as well, until they start to annoy you. So they're super bubbly. They're usually talkative. They're usually moving. They're fidgety. They're creative. They're spontaneous. They're kind of flaky sometimes. They're the daydreamers in class. Sorry, one more time. I can't resist. Scattered. Think about too much air and ether in a person, how that's going to influence them, what that's going to look like in a personality type. So the stress response for each dosha is slightly different, and that's kind of a telltale of what your excess dosha tends to be. So if a vata type is going to get stressed out, they're going to go up into their heads. They're going to get anxious. They're going to worry. They're literally going to be too much up here. So we need to do something to bring them down. They absolutely hate routine, but they're the ones that absolutely need it the most. Even just like 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night of having some predictability will help counterbalance their qualities of spontaneity that are excess. They're going to feel like frazzled and scattered, and their nervous system's going to be on high alert. And they're super fun and spontaneous. They love variety and big crowds and things like that, but sometimes they can overdo it. They're not as good at balancing themselves. And vata in the body is almost always like the form of dysfunction in the body. It's the irregularity that comes in. It's the illness that comes in. It's just, gumming up the works basically. But none of these are good or bad. They all have their yin and yang side, if you will. It's just a matter of balancing them. And I'm going to repeat a lot of the same information. Don't feel like you have to memorize it. So next we have pitta types, which is water and fire. The best illustration I could come up with for this, getting all of the qualities of water and fire, is apple cider vinegar. So it's liquid like the water is. It's a little bit hot like the fire is, at least it is in our digestive system. It's also got a sour quality, which we haven't talked about yet, but sour is one of the tastes that is excess for pitta, like drinking too much kombucha, having too much sauerkraut, sour foods, hot foods. Those are going to bring them into excess. So when you think of pitta, you can think of fire, you can think of apple cider vinegar. Those are two good illustrations for them. I don't see as much water element come up in pitta. When I think of them, I think of their fieriness for the most part. I think of water more as like go with the flow. I don't see a lot of that in their personality types typically, but they, they do tend towards oily sometimes, so the water can show up there. Their qualities, again, are light, hot, unctuous. That's that oily, wet quality I was just talking about. Mobile, so there's still some movement there. Liquid, and sharp features. So sharp features can mean like chiseled features, like athletic build. They're usually medium in size. And I think I forgot to say this about vata, and there's a chart that's going to go into the actual body types, but vata types tend to be either tall and thin and lanky, or petite with small features. They tend to be on the smaller side. So I would say, if I'm going to just oversimplify it, vatas are small, pittas are medium, kappas are large. That's the tendency, but there's obviously variations there. So pittas have medium proportions in their face. They tend to be athletic and medium build. They tend to have very distinctive eyes. So vata eyes are going to have that mobile quality. They're going to be darting all around, looking at whatever's going on, getting distracted, like, ooh, there's a squirrel, there's something shiny. Pitta types are going to like have a direct gaze. They have a piercing quality about their eyes and the way that they look at you. Like, you take them seriously when they're talking to you. They mean business. They tend to have fair freckled skin. One of the questions we ask on the questionnaire when I'm trying to establish dosha is, did you burn easily as a kid? Do you burn easily now? You can usually tell by looking at the person now if they're going to be that type. And you think of the people of Irish and Scottish heritage, they have that tendency, they have that skin that's super sensitive, that they're going to get a bug bite and it's going to get super red right away. They're prone to that heat showing up in their skin. They tend to have fair hair as well. It's usually straight and silky. And let me just pause to say this for a moment. These are oversimplifications. These are like if Pitta was all completely in one person, this is what it would look like. This is what it would be. But obviously we're going to have variations. We have all of the doshas in us, all of the elements in us. So you may have a Pitta body frame, but a Vata mind, or Vata like digestion, but Kapha like frame. So there's going to be variation. So you might be like, well, that sounded like me for a minute, but then when she said this, it didn't sound like me anymore. So just know that there's going to be variations. Just try to think about which one characterizes you the most. So as far as personality type, the Pittas are take charge, get things done. Think about that fieriness. They're transforming. They are making things happen. They are leaders. They are typically very intelligent. They like to learn. I usually get a lot of Pitta types in my class because number one, Vatas are going to be distracted, not put it on their calendar. They're going to forget about it because they're not very organized. Pitta types are going to make it happen. They want to learn, they're focused, they're organized. They did put it on their calendar. Kapha types are like, oh, that sounded fun, but I don't really feel like doing anything because they're unmotivated. And we'll get to that in a minute. But so in any case, you all probably have a little bit of Pitta in here. Otherwise you wouldn't have gotten here today. So I mentioned organized. They can be intense, as I said, with their gaze. They can be competitive. If they're not competitive with others, they're often competitive with themselves. Perfectionists, I would say, type A. I think you get the picture of this type. This one's pretty easy to spot. If they get out of balance, their stress response is not going to be to worry about it or get anxious like the Vata types do. It's going to be to like charge straight ahead. So irritable, confrontational, angry, they're going to fly off the handle if they're really out of balance. They literally get hot-headed. That heat becomes too much. As far as their digestion, they have the strongest digestion. Think about that Agni, that digestive fire I was describing. So if this dosha has a lot of fire in it, obviously they're going to have a strong fire. So they do. Vatas have the weakest digestion. They have a lot of ether and air. They tend to have gas. They tend to have bloating. They don't tend to have good digestion, although Pitta types have strong digestion. So think of that apple cider vinegar, that fire in their gut, the fire in their personality. And then the last one is Kapha. And this is molasses, which hasn't been open in a really long time. So we're just going to do it inside the jar. So think about the qualities of molasses. If you've ever tasted it, how does it taste? Strong. It is strong. What's its primary flavor? Sweet. So Kaphas are sweet. They literally have a sweet nature. They also like the flavor of sweet, which can get them in trouble. How is it moving quickly? No, they're slow. They like to take their time. They like to stay in bed. They do. And it's also sticky. So Kaphas, those elements of water and earth together, how we were talking about the swamp and congestion and retaining too much water and getting stuck too much, those Kapha types tend to get congested. They tend to get stuck in their ideas. They tend to hold on to things that don't serve them for too long. They are usually more introverted. Vatas like the big party, all the variety. Pittas like to be doing something that's achieving something, and then the Kaphas like to either be one-on-one or by themselves or doing something that engages their senses. They're very sensorial. They really like to eat. They love the flavors of food and the sensation of eating. They like soft texture, so laying under a cozy blanket, like that's inviting that Kapha, that sweetness, that softness. They're very nurturing usually, kind of the caregivers of the world, the teachers, the healthcare workers, depending on the type, but they're typically tending to people or themselves, or they're just kind of off in their own world sometimes too. So their stress response, as we were seeing with the molasses, it's not going anywhere fast. It kind of tends to get stuck. So they can get stuck. They don't really want to deal with it. They don't want to move quickly. They don't really want to face reality sometimes. And so they don't always deal with their problems, and they just kind of like let them persist, and that can cause depression. That's their stress response. As far as their digestion, it's better than Vata, but because it's got the qualities of cold and it's not as strong or fiery as the Pitta types, but they have pretty solid digestion. Here's just like a little summary. I tried to think of a couple of words to just encapsulate what the major qualities were. So if you're just to encapsulate Vata, think of the bubble, inspiration and creativity. It's what we need to get things moving. It's that, initial idea. And they are inspiring as people. They're fun. They're nice friends to have a good time with, but they're not the ones you want to depend on necessarily because they're a little flighty. Pitta types are mostly about transformation and action. Like I said, they're the doers. They get things done. And the pitta in your body is literally the metabolic processes. It's all the transformation that's occurring in your body. And kappas are, as you would expect, with earth and water being together, they're very grounded. They tend to be nurturing. They tend to be laid back and very stable, very loyal friends, very dependable people typically. All right, I'm just going to stop here for just a second to check in with you all. I've thrown a lot of really abstract ideas at you. Is this making any sense? Do you have any questions so far?
In Western, a couple of we did this.
Yeah.
And I'm basically flighty and hot.
Flighty and hot. So some Vata and some Pitta.
My husband is hot and lazy. Even though he works a lot.
Pitta Kapha. Okay. And like I said, you will have all of these doshas in you. And I do want to say also, before I get too far along, I won't be able to get into this in this class. It's in the daily and seasonal rituals class. But there's different types, there's different times of the day that let's see, how do I want to write this? Times of day. Different times of day that each dosha is more active. So when I talk about dosha, I'm putting it in people form because that's more approachable. You can envision a person and a personality, but dosha can apply to anything. It can apply to your food. It can apply to a rock. It can apply to an herb. And it also can apply to a time of day. So this is a good illustration of, think about the morning time when you've just woken up. You usually feel pretty grounded. You're moving pretty slow. You still feel heavy. That's the kapha time of day. Then you get into the middle of the day, you're getting shit done. Sorry. You're getting stuff done. You're accomplishing, you're driven, you've got that fieriness. It's also the time of day that our stomach acid is the strongest and we should eat our biggest meal. That's an Ayurvedic thing that we don't do here. So that's the pitta time of day. And then later on in the afternoon, do you notice that in the afternoon you feel a little bit more scattered? It's a little harder to focus. You can't quite keep accomplishing those tasks as well. Well, that's the Vata time of day. That's the influence of Vata coming in and making you feel scattered. So it's really meant to, if you observe these, you can start to see, okay, during the Kapha time of day, I need to get certain types of things done. And during the Pitta type of day, I need to get other things done. And then Vata type of day is more for social, interactions and creativity and things like that. So times of day are affected by dosha. Seasons, there are different seasons that influence dosha, and different seasons contain different doshas. There's times of life. Our Vata years are our older years. We become more forgetful. Our skin becomes dry and thin. We're maybe more spiritual because we're thinking about our life and kind of reflecting. So there's dosha in different aspects, not just in ourselves. So Prakriti was something that I mentioned earlier, just a little reminder of what that word means. It's basically our original blueprint from conception. It's the makeup of our dosha when we were in utero.
What's a balance for the type?
We will get to that. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I have to save that for the end, but I want you to have a good establishment of what the doshas are before I tell you how to balance them in more detail. So as far as body type, I've talked a lot about personality type. I've talked just a little bit about the body type. So you can characterize it by the classic ectomorph, mesomorph, endomorph characterization of the body. So as I said before, Vata types, they tend to be thin, lanky. They have a lightness to their frame. They're hardly ever heavy. They usually have a lightness, whether they're short or tall. They can be petite also, but typically tall and lanky is what will identify them. As far as Pitta types, I said that they were more athletic, competitive, so they tend to be more muscular. They tend to be medium in build, medium height. So one of the questions that I ask to establish dosha from childhood is, what was your height compared to your peers when you were in grade school? that tells me which dosha was predominant as far as your body frame. And then kappas, they tend to be more round. They tend to be a little bit heavier. It's not even necessarily that they're out of balance or overweight. That's just their natural build. They tend to be more curvy. They tend to be more soft. As I said earlier, they're soft and sweet. That applies to their body as well. Again, generalizations because there's variety in people. We're more complex than that. So just in a different format, I've said all of these things, but just to review them, the Vata types are going to be tall and thin or short and petite. I didn't talk about their hair yet. This is, again, can have variety to it, but they tend to have curly hair, frizzy hair. I think of that dryness of ether and air, just like, you know, exemplified in the craziness of their hair, and their personalities can kind of go along with that as well. It's a little wiry and crazy. Their eyes, as I said, tend to dart around because they're distractible and they're always moving. They tend to have thin lips. That's one of the things on the forms is that we look for as well. And they have irregularities in them. They might not be completely proportional. Their top lip might be like a lot smaller than their bottom lip. That's seeing Vata in a body type, is when you see irregularity. Pittas are very regular. Like, think about the irregularity of Vata when I was saying that they didn't like routine. So it can, when I say irregular, I mean irregular in their habits, but also irregular in their characteristics of their physical body. And then Pitta, as I said, is very regular, medium, proportional, silky, straight, fine hair typically. Their eyes have a very penetrating gaze, and they're usually an almond shape. And their lips tend to be proportional, medium in moisture. They're the most boring physically. They're the most predictable, but I tend to see a lot of them because they're the ones that make it to the consults. Medium to oily skin, so they can get acne. They can tend towards that inflammation. If you think about that heat that we were talking about, it can show up there. Their skin is oilier than any of the other doshas typically. Kappas can be oily too. And their skin is medium thickness. There's a little test you can do to see about your skin type. We do this in a consultation. So if you're just pinching a tiny little bit, think about an older person's skin when you're pinching it, how thin it is. That's kind of a Vata type skin. They're literally thin skinned. They're sensitive and they're thin. They tend to have dry, thin skin. Pitta types, medium. So you're going to pinch a medium amount, maybe like a quarter of an inch. I'm not good at math, so I can't estimate too well, but it's going to be, I don't know, an average amount. And then with kappas, I have a sister-in-law that was like a true kappa type and went to pinch her skin and like almost couldn't get any. Like it was hard to pinch because it was so thick. And you know, it's just they're sturdier. So their skin tends to be that way too. They really have beautiful skin typically. If I was to stereotype the Pitta as being like Irish Scottish, I would stereotype Kappa. A good illustration of that is people from India. That really luxurious, beautiful hair, beautiful round eyes, like puppy dog eyes, thick, beautiful skin. It's usually balanced. Their hair can be coarse or wavy. It's typically shiny and very healthy. And as I said, their eyes are just like really beautiful and draw you in. So Pittas jump out at you. The Kappas have a sweetness to their eyes. It's like, you know, softness. So the characteristics of ether and air were cold. Both of those elements were cold. Vatas tend to run cold. They don't, if you think about their body type, if they're going to be tall and thin or petite, they don't have a lot of insulation. They're typically not going to carry a lot of weight. They're typically not going to remember to eat meals. So they're a little scattered when it comes to that. They have a lot of variety and they don't tend to have a lot of body fat. Their elimination, think about excess ether and air in the colon, can tend towards dry, hard, like rabbit pellet constipation almost. That's Vata showing up in the colon. Their digestion is reflective of their nervous frenetic energy, and it can be disturbed. They can have gas, bloating, just upset stomach after eating. They tend to have a lot of energy, but they don't steadily plod along. They use it in quick bursts, and then they're like, okay, I'm done. Pitta types, they tend to run hot, obviously. Fire is got that element of heat about it. Their elimination is probably the most regular. Like they're the I'm going to go every morning without fail. If they do get out of balance with their elimination, they're going to tend towards diarrhea. They have strong digestion, strong stomach acid. Sometimes that acid can get to be too much and they can have acid reflux or indigestion. As far as their endurance, they tend to be able to do pretty well. They're kind of the middle of the pack when it comes to that. They are more athletic, so they can kind of go for a while. The Kapha types are not as cold as Vata, but they tend to be cool. Their elimination is regular as well. They have a regularity about them, just like Pittas do, but they are slow. So if you add in that element of slow, as we talked about with the molasses, their elimination can be that way as well. They have a more sluggish metabolism, might take them a while to digest a meal. They might feel a little heavy after a meal. And as far as movement, they are kind of like, the rabbit and the hare, I'm sorry, the tortoise and the hare. So they're the tortoise that's just like steadily plodding along. And they can go forever. Like if you were to take them on a hike or something, they'll outlast everybody, but they'll be going at a pretty slow, steady pace the whole time. And unfortunately, it's hard to get them motivated to actually start doing whatever it is. So they don't test that very often. There was a dosha quiz online that asked about endurance, and it said something like, you can go for a really long time, but you prefer not to test it. So that kind of characterizes Kapha. Okay, finally, I've talked at you for enough time. Now you're going to talk at me for a minute. So we're going to see if you retained any of the gibberish that I said. Tell me what you see in this picture. Tell me the qualities that you notice. You don't have to tell me dosha. Just tell me what you notice about this individual. What's that? So, yep, it's Vata hair. You're right. It's tight and curly. It's got some air in between. It's a little crazy and a little bit frizzy. Very good. What else do you notice? Youth. Okay. Yep. Young spirit. Say that again.
Light.
Light. Yep. A light frame. He looks like he's kind of tall and lanky. So the almond shaped eyes are actually a pitta feature. They are kind of almond. They're a little bit longer. Like if I were to do an evaluation on this person, I would probably write pitta vata eyes because it's combination. The pitta eyes are more almond and the vata eyes are a little bit more narrow. So he's kind of in between those two. What else do you see? He is grounded. Yes. I can imagine him getting up and skipping around just after this, though, like playing in the flowers. He looks playful.
He's focused, but he's still doing something with his hands.
Fidgeting. Oh, I didn't even ever notice that one before. Very good. Yes. They are classic fidgeters. In fact, when I recommend meditation techniques to Vata types, I recommend them getting mala beads, if you know what those are, so that they can actually fidget while they're meditating. Otherwise, it's going to be hard. So yeah, definitely liking to move. And what's his spirit look like? Does he look heavy? Does he look focused? Or does he look light and playful?
Light and playful.
Yep. Anything else we're seeing? That's all I got. Yeah, he does look sweet. Oh, one thing I didn't say, I think I said Pitta skin type is typically fair and burns easily. Vatas tend to not burn easily. They tend to be tan. And Kappas tend to be kind of in between the two. Sometimes a little pale. I'm sorry?
He's welcoming.
Welcoming?
Yeah.
Yeah. Inviting you in?
Yeah.
Nice. Vatas are good at that.
Yes.
Okay.
Someone has asked, is it normal to be pitta for most of your life and at age 40 start becoming opposite?
Especially during COVID, yes. Yes, your dosha can definitely change over time. I mean, obviously, if there's a big change in society or your own personal life, you can have a big shift. It usually is not going to change dramatically without some major influence. All of those outside influences we've been talking about during class, it would take a pretty dramatic one to shift that dramatically from it being your primary dosha pitta, then all of a sudden switching to completely kapha. You might be taking on a little bit extra kapha, but as you're learning the tools in this class, you'll be able to try to bring that back down to what is your normal type. I will say also that it's natural to slow down as you age. And there are different seasons of life. It's actually Kapha time of life is actually your younger years when you're forming the structures of your body, and you are a little softer and rounder. And then the Pitta time is the middle age years when you're earning an income and starting your career and going through your puberty changes, your hormones are going. And then the Vata time is more around 50, 55, 60. That doesn't mean that that's going to be a perfect scenario for your life, though. There definitely can be outside influences that can change that. So if you want to chat with me, you can just feel free to send me an email. My email will be on the last slide and we can chat about what's going on. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. Quite different than the last character. What do you notice about her?
Fierce.
Fierce, focused, piercing gaze. Yes. The freckled skin, it's fair, red hair. And they don't always have red hair, but they can. Typically, if you see a redhead, you're going to know there's some Pitta. They are. See, it works. So are her facial features pretty proportional? She's a little bit crooked, but yeah, her lips look pretty medium size, I'd say. What shape do you find her eyes to be? Almond. Yep. And does she look like she might kick your butt? Yeah, one or the other. Yeah, sharp, angry, irritable.
Yeah.
Maybe. Or she's gonna get some shit done. One or the other. All right, what do you see here? Soft, nurturing, sweet, comfortable too, right? Like the senses are engaged. How about their physical features? they're squishy is a good word. Yeah. Kappas love squishy. They're rounder. They're a little softer in their facial features. Their face is literally a little rounder, and everybody's is a little bit when they're a kid. Say that again. Yeah, true. But kids are squishy too. Some don't. Some get really thin and frail when they get older. So yeah. But I would say both of them have a pretty round face. They have pretty full lips, beautiful, even skin, thick hair. Yeah. Anything else? They're sitting too, right? They're grounded. All right. That was all nice and sweet, but now on to our stress responses, which is usually a telltale sign of which dosha is flaring up and bothering us the most. So the top left picture where she's got her hands kind of clenched, how would you describe that person in the way they're feeling? Worried in their head. What did you say? Anxious. Yep. So that is our classic Vata response right there, to sit there and fret and worry and be in their head. Even her body type has some Vata characteristics. What do you see as far as her body? There's just a couple, but yeah. She looks pretty thin and lanky, right? Looks like her body frame. We can't see her whole body, but she does look on the thin side. Her face looks kind of long, which is a Vata characteristic. And her eyes are kind of in between almond and narrow, but I would say that they're a little bit more narrow. A little bit of frizzy hair, not too much. She's kind of a Kapha Vata combination hair-wise. All right, moving down below, person laying on the couch. How do you think they're feeling? Depressed. They've gone within. They're drawing away from the world, if you will. What else do you notice about them?
Kind of weird.
Laying around, but like if a Pitta was laying around, they might be like sprawled out because they were hot. How is she? She's curled up. She's trying to engage her senses, to engage that softness. She's got a pillow like pressing on her. She wants that extra sensory. And yeah, she's probably cold. Pitta types are usually hot. Vata types are usually cold, and Kapha types can be cool as well. All right, on to the throwing her hands up in frustration. What do you see there? Fiery. She literally looks like she's gonna like breathe smoke out of her mouth or throw the computer. What else do you see? What do you notice about the hair?
Straight.
It's straight, kind of medium, not thick or thin, silky, medium in build. She doesn't look, I can't tell if she's athletic or not, but she's definitely medium proportions. Anything else? Focus.
She's doing work or study or she's doing something.
She's doing both, right? She's like, yeah, she's got a computer and a book open. That is a good lesson right there in Pitta types and how they get out of balance very easily. If I had one word of advice for Pitta types, it's focus on being and not always doing, because they are all about their checklists and they schedule too much for themselves and they overwork, and that leads to stress response. So how would you say she's feeling?
Overwhelmed.
Maybe overwhelmed. I would say angry. She looks pretty irritable. Like I'm thinking she might pick up the computer and throw it.
Yeah.
Or say some sharp words to the person on the other
The
end.
internet might shut down. She's just like,
Yeah.
"I'll
Yeah.
finish your paper."
Shannon, does this remind you of a coworker who frequently wants to throw her computer? I tease her all the time when she's here. Trisha's not here to defend herself, so. All right, so now let's look at food. Food has a lot of doshic influence. It's something that we do daily, 3 times a day, hopefully. If you're a Vata type, you might only just graze here and there. But let's look at the different foods and the doshic influence. So let's look at the kale salad. What would you say the qualities of a salad are? Is it heavy or is it light?
It's like light.
It's light.
Should do romaine lettuce.
It is cooling. Looks like there's a chat. Let's see. Oh, okay. No problem, Lily. It is cool and it's also raw and hard to digest, which this isn't talking dosha necessarily, but it kind of is because Vata types tend to gravitate towards raw, light foods like that, but they have the weakest digestion. If you've got a really, weak stomach acid, eating raw foods is going to be really hard. It's going to create more of that Vata imbalance in the gut. So yes, that's a very Vata provoking food. I always tell this story, and sorry for those of you that have already heard it, but I first got exposed to Ayurveda up in New Hampshire at a retreat, introduction to Ayurveda. It was a 5-day class, and it was at a retreat center. So you've got a lot of spiritual types, you've got a lot of yogis, a lot of tall, thin, lanky, bubbly people, a lot of Vata types. So I don't know why, that's just what tended to be there. And we had a buffet style situation with the lunch, and there were all kinds of options. There were lots of cooked food, there were stir fries, there were soups, and there was a big salad bar. And every Vata type that would walk by, I swear, had that kale salad that they were going, as they're bubbly and talking and chatting with the person next to them, that they're going to go eat. And I'm like, no, take that off your plate. But it's true. We are drawn towards what we are, basically, but we get out of balance if we do too much of that, and we need to go in the opposite direction. So what would balance that Vata type? Some bread. Bread's heavy. Some soup. Soup is a great choice for Vata because it's not going to challenge your digestion, and it's got that oily quality to it sometimes, and they're dry, so it helps with that. So that would be a good option, and it's warming. Yep, exactly. So how about the spiciness? This one here? The top one is like a stir fry, like Szechuan pepper chicken or something like that.
That looks way too
Spicy. Yes,
What type of-
that's the primary quality. So that's superheating. Who does not need to be eating that? Who is the ones that you always see putting hot sauce on everything?
Oh, the pizza.
Pittas. Yes, drinking kombucha, putting hot sauce on, talking on the phone and having a conference call while they're stuffing their face furiously. Yeah, all pitta increasing activities. So yes.
Do they eat faster?
I would say Vatas might be the fastest. They're kind of a little spazzy in nature and tend to graze and just shove it in. Pittas will be more focused with their eating, I'd say, but they're almost always like multitasking when they're eating, which is a huge no-no in Ayurveda. I mean, we can't rest and digest if we're doing multiple things at a time. So mindful eating is a huge part of my classes. And when we do the cooking class, we actually like light a candle and get in our senses and like actually practice that. We eat with our eyes and all of our senses before we eat with our mouth, because that's where digestion starts. So I wish I could get into that, but I'll stay focused. What's the last one? What qualities do you notice about the tomato soup and grilled cheese? Comfort. Who might like comfort? Kappa. Yep. So what are the qualities of the creamy tomato soup and the cheese? Is it light or is it heavy?
It's heavy, it's like winter time.
It is. And
And
that is
Yummy tomato.
So that's, she just brought up a good point. That's good medicine right there. We intuitively know to do that. When it's cold outside, we want to do things that are warming and heavy, right? So in addition to being heavy, the dairy is also, is it oily or is it dry? Oily, fatty, yes. So kappas already have enough insulation, so they need to eat things more like the kale salad. They need to eat the lighter foods. I don't recommend raw all the time for any dosha, except for pitta can handle it, but kappas, not necessarily a raw salad, but something on the lighter side, smaller proportions, lots of veggies, a little bit of protein. Yep. You can, yeah, absolutely. Doing a slight wilt on your greens would be a better idea for sure. Or drinking some ginger tea with your meal if you have to eat something raw. All right, let's see what we got next. And Shannon, how am I doing on time? Okay. All right, so I go into this in great detail in my cooking and nutrition class, but we'll just briefly go over it now. And let me just say, don't get caught up in this and go home and be like, well, I'm a pitta type. I can't have anything that's spicy, sour, and salty. Like none, I have to throw it all away. No, we need all of the 6 tastes that are recognized. We feel satisfied when we go to a high-end dining experience, and that's because it's hitting all of those different flavors. If you notice how they layer the different flavors, you're experiencing just about all of them. It's satisfying to our palate. It's literally stimulating different organs on our tongue and giving us a sense of satisfaction. And there's medicine behind tasting all of those tastes. So get all of them, just be aware of which ones might throw you out of balance. So the flavors that go with vata, the flavors of ether and air, are sweet. No, I'm sorry, that's the opposite ones. Sorry. I think I wrote something wrong here. Let's see. Pungent, bitter, and astringent. No, that's right. Taste and properties that increase the dosha. So for vata, no, that's wrong. I'm sorry. That shouldn't say pungent. That should say, no, not salty. What's left? Sweet, salty, sour. I'm having a brain cramp, so I apologize. But the main flavor of vata is astringent because it is dry and it's light. So things that are astringing and drying is something that they want to try to stay away from for the most part. The flavors that are balancing to them, and I'll go home and revise this once my brain works again, are sweet, salty, and sour. So when I say sweet, I don't mean go eat a cupcake, but like have a carrot or an apple or something. And as we've said, they need things that are warm because they tend to be cold. Their digestion is cold. They need things that are heavy, and they need things that are oily because they're dry. Vatas do have an extra hard time with digestion, digesting just about anything, but especially fats and proteins. So doing something like taking ginger tea with their meals. There's a pretty popular traditional tea in Ayurveda called CCF tea that is really good for vata types. It's cumin, coriander, and fennel. And those are all really good digestives. That's a way to counterbalance that vata type digestion. If you're a pitta type, the flavors that you probably are going to like the most are pungent, sour, and salty. And those are personality descriptions of them as well. But they are balanced by sweet, astringent, and bitter. So astringent is going to pull that excess oil that they have, and the sweet is going to soften them a little bit. They're a little hard-edged and sharp sometimes, and the sweet's going to bring that down. As far as the qualities of their food, having food that is dry and cool is the primary concern, but things that are a little bit heavy too to ground them is also good. The pittas have the best digestion and they can handle just about any kind of food. Kapha types, they love sweet primarily. just, it's like them. They like salty also and sour, but they need bitter. So bitter greens is a good balancing trick for them. Things that are pungent. So kappas are not very motivated. They need things that are invigorating and stimulating. So pungent things are going to fit the bill. And then the astringent, as I said before, they're going to be the ones come winter and allergy season. They're going to be all stuffed up and snotty and mucusy, and they need help counterbalancing that. So eating things that are astringent. You don't want to take that grilled cheese and tomato soup, especially if you've got a cold. That's just going to increase your congestion. It's going to create excess. What's that? The tomato soup, if it was maybe, it had a broth base instead of a cream base, it would be okay. But because it's so heavy.
I looked up Veda and I see sweet, salty, and sour.
Sweet, salty, and sour. Yes, or the balancing. It was the taste that increased dosha that I wasn't sure about, the pungent, bitter, and astringent. It doesn't feel right to me that pungent would increase vata, but maybe it does. Maybe I'm just forgetting. I don't know. I can't figure out that riddle at the moment. Kappas need to be careful about carbs, and I'm sure you can probably see why. They have a slow metabolism, and they tend to like to graze and snack. So we talked earlier at the beginning of class, I talked about how there are different learning styles. There's people that like to learn hands-on, that's called kinesthetic. There's people that like to learn auditorily. They can listen to a lecture and get the information. And there are some people that prefer to see the information. So it's not 100%, but there's definitely a noticeable correlation between learning style and dosha, which could be really helpful for teachers to know this, actually. So the first one up at the top, she's what does it look like she's doing? Is she focused?
No,
She's daydreaming. Her head is in the clouds. She's literally up in the ether, right? What type do you think she is?
The first one.
The vata. Yep. She is a vata dosha kid. She learns best by listening. Typically they're auditory learners, but it has to be interesting and there has to be some variety there.
So like would hands-on be balancing for that?
I want to say yes, because that makes sense to me, but that's not what I learned. I mean, it's gonna vary kid to kid, but vatas tend to be more auditorily focused. I don't know. There's connections between each of our senses and which dosha is strongest in all of those. I can't remember those off the top of my head right now, but that might be why. But they tend to be more auditory learners. They're typically going to do okay, but they're also going to be like doodling simultaneously. I find that vata kids need to be doing something while they're listening. They're getting it, but it doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like they're paying attention, but sometimes they actually are. I have all three of these kids. I have 3 daughters and I have one of each. So it's pretty interesting to observe. So how about the next picture over, the little redhead with the glasses? What do you notice about her? She's a pitta. You guys are too good. She is. She's laser focused on what she's reading. She looks very studious with her little glasses. What about her build? Yep, red hair, medium build, fair skin. She's a classic little pitta. And she's going to learn best by looking. They're very visual. Pittas, I don't know if it's that piercing gaze that they have, but they are visual learners. They like to look. And then the last one at the bottom, remember how I said senses? Who is it that really likes to use their senses and likes touch? Kappa. So the Kappa type kids tend to like to work independently. They don't like to be as social in the interactions. They like to do things with their hands. They learn best by kinesthetic learning, which is kind of what I'm trying to bring in with these props, something concrete. So as far as the social interactions, who do you think would like that first scene with the balloons and the big crowd of people? The vata. They like the variety. They're not going to get bored because they can jump from thing to thing. They can be spontaneous. There's a lot of stimulation there and they like that. It's light and it's fun and it's got a lot of energy to it. So I don't know if I said this, but the group that's sitting in a circle, I would say looks like they're doing something together, right? Like having a study group or something of the sort. So pitta types, they like small groups and they also like it to be purposeful. So they like it when there's a mission behind whatever they're getting together to do. They don't want to just kind of come and hang out. They want to be accomplishing something while they're hanging out. So that's their tendency. And then the last one down at the bottom, just two people hanging out, arms around each other. What type do you think that looks like?
The kappa.
The kappa. They prefer to just hang solo or just have one pal at a time. They're overwhelmed by big groups. So this one's a little bit more complex. We'll see if we can get through it. I'm going to actually write the qualities again for just a second, although I think you guys are getting it. So vatas, are they cold or hot? Cold. Are they dry or are they oily? Dry. And we'll just go with those for now. Pittas, are they hot or are they cold? Hot. Dry or oily? And then kappas, are they cold? Good. You even got the cool versus the cold. I'm impressed. And then are they dry or oily? Oily-ish. They can tend towards oily too. Yeah. So let's look at that first environment, the mountain. I can't tell you exactly what temperature it is there, but because it's got snow on the mountains, I would say it's probably cool there, right? Does it look like it's super moist there, or does it look like it's fairly dry? Dry. So how will the vata type do there? It's going to send them into excess, right? They're going to get colder and they're going to get drier. How would the pitta do there? Pretty well. It's a good balancing place for them. And the kapha was kind of in between. So move over to where we live, the humid, hot, what we're in right now, the tropics. How is a vata going to do there? Super well. It's a really appropriate environment. So kudos to you if you are a vata and you live in Florida. You don't have that extra challenge. How are the pittas doing right now in our hot Florida weather?
Your air conditioners like it's 72 and they're crazy.
You can literally hear the anger like in the roads, people revving their cars. Like literally I'll hear people like zoom by and I'll be like, oh, excess pitta. You see it everywhere. People are like blowing their tops because it's so hot. Well, what if you want to go outside? All right. So this one here looks a little bit like a desert scene. How is a desert climate going to be? Dry or moist? Dry. And hot or cold? That's true. Don't make it so complicated. So vatas are going to be drier, but at least they'll be warm during the day. And then pitta types are going to get too hot, but at least it'll dry out their oiliness. And kappa is kind of a mixed bag again. Yeah. And then the snowy place, kappas might like that if they've got a nice fire inside. That might make them feel happy they can just escape there, but it's probably going to be too cold for them, too cold for the vata. The pittas will do well though. So obviously you can't change your climate. I mean, you can, but not everybody can just pick up and move. But it's just something to be in consideration of, and it's something to consider when we have seasons changing as well. Though we don't have much seasonal change here.
We got hurricanes.
We do. Yeah, that's exciting. That's influence of vata. It's vata. Not necessarily the weather, but just the fact that there's irregularities, there's excitement, there's change, it's movement. So
Right.
yes.
Probably this was multitasking. Like, Florida.
I said that they are balanced. It's a balancing climate because they tend to be dry skinned and they tend to be cool, and Florida's warm and moist. So yeah. Hence the girl that moved to Florida. One day I'm going to pull you guys up here and I'm going to be like, what do you think Shannon is? What do you think Trisha is? Marcia, come up here. We'll evaluate everybody. Yes.
Could maybe some of these characteristics show in like environment, like house design or something?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the things we studied in class too, is how you can design your environment to bring in more of the element that's going to balance you. So that's actually on our recommendation forms, one of the ones that I have. I don't have it today, but I could certainly email it to you guys. So yeah, bringing in more water element for pitta, for example. Water is super balancing to pitta types. They really do well when they get around water or in water. So bringing in more water elements to cool and soothe them is really helpful. Bringing in cooling colors, and we will talk about that in the recommendations as well, like colors and gems and things like that, and how all of those environmental things can influence you. Yeah, that's a good point.
But naturally, they would want a fireplace,
Yes.
right?
Sometimes, I mean, that one's a little tricky because they already are hot. So I don't know in that case. That one's a
That's
little
what I'm really
tricky.
confused, if
Yeah.
You're like drawn to what you are.
Sometimes.
because Sometimes it's hard to know what's balancing.
I
You
know.
don't want what's balancing.
Right. Yes, I know it is.
That's tricky.
You got to really tune into your body and figure out, is this a legitimate craving or is this me trying to balance myself? It's funny. My daughter just came from, what class was that? It was a gifted class, I guess. And they were talking about how cravings can sometimes say that like you have a nutrient deficiency or something. And it's like when you have your period, you're craving chocolate because it has magnesium in it and you're deficient in that. And she was like, so does that mean that when I want ice cream, I can have it because I need the calcium? I was like, yeah, good try. All right, so this is, I'm not going to read through this again because we've already talked about it a lot, but I'll just remind you that Vata is balanced by routine, Pitta's is balanced by doing less, and Kapha's is balanced by getting out of their comfort zone. Yes, less seriousness, yeah. Instead of focus, focus, do. Yeah, absolutely. As far as eating, Vatas are tend to be very irregular. Those kids that graze all the time and never actually sit down for a meal. They're eating while they're in the car. They need to eat regularly. That's one of the things I would put on their forms is like, you need to work on having 3 meals. Pittas are going to, within 10 minutes of getting hungry, want to kill somebody. So they need to eat regularly and they typically do. They will get hangry. Kappas can actually go for a long time without a meal because of they have that slower metabolism. They can go for a while, but they like to eat the most, so they don't tend to want to because they like the sensory experience of eating. So if you imagine somebody being airheaded, are they going to have a good memory? Vata types, they're kind of scattered, right? They can, there are, yes, there are. There's lots of herbs for all of this, for sure. We'll get into that in other classes. But no, they tend to just, it tends to like go straight through. It's just like flies through their brain. They had it for a second and then it's gone. My teacher, she'd do something a little bit like scattered brained or forget something. And she'd be like, oh, Vata. It's like, she's calling it out. Like, stop plaguing me. Pitta types are focused learners. They have a good recall. They can sit down and look at something and memorize it pretty easily. Kapha types tend to take a little bit longer to do it, but once they have the information, it's like deeply implanted in them and they won't forget it. As far as pitch of voice and conversational style, Vatas are very bubbly and chatty and talk very fast. And a telltale sign of a Vata type is somebody that asks you a question and before you've gotten through your answer, they've already interrupted you to ask you a second question. And and then they're like looking over here out the window because there's something, you know, moving and they're not really even listening to you. So Pitta types tend to be more to the point, concise, conversational. Sometimes if they're mad, they can be cutting or argumentative. The Kappas have a lower tone of voice. They tend to speak slower and quieter, and they tend to not like to talk very much. They're not typically going to be the ones that speak up in class. But if they say something, it's actually pretty interesting usually. Like they have cool things to say that are unexpected sometimes. As far as the stress response, you guys remind me, what does Vata do when they're stressed? Nervous, worried, they get in their head. What about Pitta? Irritable, angry. And then Kapha?
Chill.
Withdraw from the world, ostrich, stick their head in the sand. Yeah, or chill, depending on how balanced they are. The sleep thing is huge, especially for Vata. So Vatas, think about a Vata type who's light, full of ether and air. He doesn't have a lot of insulation. It's hard for them to fall asleep. I have a Vata kid and I literally just like want to go put like a compression, you know, one of those weighted blankets on her because even in the middle of the night, like she's constantly moving the entire time. Like she can't get a restful night's sleep because she's very light, she's very active, and she is moving all over the place the entire time. So sleep is a challenge for Vatas. And obviously we need sleep to feel grounded and balanced. So it's something that they really have to work towards. Having a good nighttime routine can really help them. Pitta types tend to go to bed regularly, wake up early, feel fine. They get 7-8 hours and they're good, and they're very regular with their sleep typically. Kapha types love sleep. They don't want to get out of bed in the morning. They want to stay cozy in their bed. What's that?
Rip Van Winkle.
Yeah. Or the teenager. Have some of those too. Food, we talked about that. We talked about the cravings. We talked about the types of gatherings that people like. So it's now trying to figure out where you are in your state of balance or imbalance, which doshas are either plaguing you or helping you. Your Prakriti is something that's harder to figure out on your own. You can probably look back at pictures of yourself as a child or think about stories from when you're a child. That's something you probably need a guidance of a practitioner to figure out. But you can still work on what's happening to you now. Where are you seeing excesses in your life, and get some balance.
For the age of 5 or 5.
We do for Prakriti on our questionnaire, we do elementary age, basically from 5 to 11. And that's not, I mean, if we could interview at conception, we would, but nobody would remember that anything earlier than 5. So it's hard pressed sometimes just to get people to remember the elementary age, but I can usually say things like, well, when you stood up in line in class, were you taller than everyone else? Were you shorter? Were your hands clammy when you were holding your friend's hand, or were they dry and hot? Tell me a story about when you were little. And there's so much dosha in stories that people tell that I can usually figure it out. And then if they can bring a childhood photo too, it really tells me a lot. And parents, knowing what their parents looked like too, can tell me a lot. So it's actually not that hard to figure out. Yeah. And hopefully, if you're not like really wrecking your life with making bad choices, you're not terribly far from where you should be. You're just a little out of whack, and one of the levels is a little bit off. So that's what we hope to see. Yeah. So I didn't talk about this yet. I did say that everybody has all the doshas in them, but there are different combinations, and I'll sort of show you this on the board as an example. You're not going to figure out exactly what your dosha is today, but you should just know that there's different combinations. So, for example, if I had a form and questionnaire and looked at somebody's face and took their pulse and looked at their tongue and calculated all the different dosha, let's say this was 10, this was 6, and this was 4. So this is Pitta, this is Vata, this is Kapha. So the way that I would characterize that person, this person has 10. Obviously, their primary dosha is going to be Pitta. That was the highest thing that was showing up in them physically and energetically. And so their primary dosha would be Pitta, but they had a lot of Vata as well. So because their Vata was half as much as their Pitta, they're called Pitta Vata. They didn't have a whole lot of Kapha. Actually, no, let me make that smaller. They didn't have enough Kapha to show up and be named in their, they've got some, everybody's got some of all. They didn't have enough that it gets named in their description of their Prakriti. So that's just one example of how that works. So you may be single dosha Pitta, you may be single dosha Kapha or Vata. You might be a combination of Pitta Vata, Pitta Kapha. Kapha and Vata, because they're so polar opposites, are not a very common combination. I see it occasionally, but it's not as common of a presentation. And then tridoshic at the bottom, that means like all of those levels that I drew up there are just about even, super rare. Like I hardly ever see that. And actually that person has a hard time because they've got so many strong influences in their life that it's like the sides of themselves are warring within themselves, and it's hard for them to figure out which way to go. So finally, on to the balancing recommendations. So Marcia, would you do me a favor?
Yeah.
I have Vata in my mouth.
Just water.
Thank you. Yeah, just water is great.
That's funny.
So for Vata types, we've talked about a lot of these recommendations, but just to reiterate, things that are grounding, nourishing, and warming as far as foods. And soups and stews are a great example of that. Root vegetables are fantastic. If they can't eat things that are cooked and warm, eating things that have warming spices on them, like ginger, cardamom, cinnamon, nutmeg, all of those warming carminative spices are great for Vata. They're grounding and they help their digestion. Thank you. Trying to focus their flavor profiles of their food on salty, sweet, and sour is balancing. And as I mentioned before, having a cup of ginger or CCFT with their meals is a good addition. And CCFT is something that you can put together yourself. You can get most of those herbs at health food store or at our apothecary at Herbals. But you can also go to Banyan Botanicals. It's a good resource for Ayurvedic herbs and tools. And they also have a nice blog and video section where you can learn. So I put in big caps, the main things that balance Vata are rhythm or routine, and that includes movement as well. So doing exercise that's like super spirited is not as good for them. They need something that's rhythmic and steady because they are not those things. They need that to balance. They need things that are nourishing, as we said. They typically tend to be the undernourished dosha. So good examples of balancing movement for Vata types: grounding restorative yoga, not the hot yoga, not, you know, having a dance party, doing grounding restorative yoga. Gardening, why would gardening be good for a Vata type? Grounded, earth element, inviting that earth element. Yep, exactly. And it's also a little bit rhythmic and low to the ground too. Tai Chi, moving the energy that way. We didn't talk about this much, but Tai Chi and yoga are really the only two things that I know of that are not just going to move your body, but it's also going to move your energy in a way that's just different from the rest of the forms of movement. So that's very balancing for all of the doshas, but Tai Chi is particularly good because of its rhythmic, steady movements, particularly good for Vata. Any movement that's slow, rhythmic, and grounding. And then, as I've said ad nauseum, steady routines, that's what balances them, and they need sleep. So having a good sleep routine, maybe taking magnesium, which is a grounding mineral, before bed, taking some herbs like passion flower, valerian, just having a ritual and routine around going to bed, and maybe like a heavy blanket. They probably are going to be cold anyway, so. The colors that are most balancing for Vata types are those fall colors, the earthy colors, green, yellow, orange, and gold. And my recommendation for Vata types who tend to be anxious, this was a game changer for me, doing Nadi Shodhana or alternate nostril breathing. There's a class coming up in November or December, subtle body, the energetic body. And it's about the chakras and different pranayama techniques. I'll teach you, we'll literally sit down and do that one together in that class. It is basically just switching back and forth between each nostril, and it invites your lunar and solar sides to come together. It just completely activates your parasympathetic nervous system. So when you're having to focus on going back and forth and you're breathing that deeply, it's hard to still be in your head at that moment. So it's a really good one for Vata when they're anxious. Doing meditation practice is hard for them. It's hard for them to have a routine. They like it because they like that spiritual connection sometimes, but having something to anchor them while they're doing it is good, whether it's trying to visualize something in their mind or actually holding on to something like a mala. Any questions on balancing things for Vata before I go on? Okay, so now for
Hey,
Pitta.
Laura,
Yes.
what's the site to order the CCFT? Can't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Banyan Botanicals. Banyan, like the tree that we have here in Florida, and then Botanicals. I think it's just banyanbotanicals.com. It's right here behind me. Oops, sorry. So pittas, the main thing is their fieriness, their heat when it comes to what they're doing and their actual physical body. So things that are cooling, calming, and cleansing. Flavors that are sweet, bitter, and astringent. Don't wait to eat because you will get hangry. Don't overconsume caffeine and alcohol. Those are very stimulating and heating. Avoiding a lot of excess of spicy, fermented, or salty foods. Physical movement that's good for Pitta. Pitta's, I have a friend that's a Pitta type, and she's always doing like these crazy yoga routines and going to hot yoga, and like they usually like the harder, physically challenging, competitive stuff, but it raises their Pitta. So doing things that are a little bit less competitive, doing things in water, paddleboarding, kayaking, swimming, and just in general, it's not even the type of exercise. Any kind of movement that you enjoy is good. It's almost your intention with how you're doing it. Like, are you pushing yourself really hard? Are you like forcing yourself into every yoga posture and making it perfect? Or are you doing it in a relaxed manner that's like balancing and soothing for you? And then a big recommendation that I already mentioned is not overscheduling, making sure that they have ample spaciousness in their day, and time for fun, as you said, is important too. The cooling colors are the ones that are most balancing. So wearing those colors, surrounding themselves, painting your walls these colors, having stones that are these colors, eating foods that are these colors even. Blue, purple, rose, indigo, turquoise, green. And then the meditation exercise and pranayama that I recommend for Pitta types is Shatali breath, which we do all of these in the class that I mentioned, but it's basically sipping in cooling air through your tongue when you've made it into the shape of a straw. And it's really helpful, especially this time of year when it's so hot. Like, you just feel like you're getting overheated. If you take in 20 of those breaths, take 5 minutes to do that, it will significantly cool you off.
Oh, I mean, definitely.
And let me give you another resource as well. Yoga with Adrienne, her company is called Find What Feels Good. She has a lot of free videos on pranayama techniques. So Nadi Shodhana, the alternate nostril, the Shatali, and then the breath of fire, which is the next one I'm going to tell you about. She has demos for all of those where she will sit down and walk you through them. And she's super down to earth and approachable. She has this cute dog named Benji that does yoga beside her. So she's a good resource. Another thing for Pitta types is doing meditation that's either visual or focused on gratitude. Just that softness of a gratitude practice can be really helpful for them. Kapha recommendations: foods that are warming because they're cool, stimulating because they need that, and cleansing because they tend to accumulate things. Avoiding things that are heavy and sweet. Trying not to snack too much. Their metabolism's slow. They can't handle that as much. Doing new activities, doing things that are out of your comfort zone, pushing yourself to do something that's a little bit different, more novel. Not getting stuck in your ways, letting go of things in your physical space too that are not serving you anymore, like clearing it out because that's an accumulation and they don't need that. It creates stuck energy. Physical movement, things that are vigorous. So as far as yoga goes, doing like rounds of sun salutations can be really good and brightening for Kapha types. Kundalini yoga is fantastic because it's stimulating not just their body, but also like their prana, Shakti. Doing things like dancing that are just like upbeat and fun and will lighten them up. My friend over here is a dancing instructor at the Gulfport Casino. If you're a Kapha type and you want to try something fun and new. Okay. Things that are bright, light, stimulating, and novel is the theme. Colors that are kind of a mix there because Kaphas are a little bit of a mix. They're cool, but they're not cold. So they need some stimulation. So the stimulating colors of red and orange can be good, violet, yellow, and white. And then the meditation that's good for them, that will kind of enliven them, that will get their energy boosted, is Kapalabhati, which is breath of fire. That one's like where you're pumping your breath like a bellows almost. And then meditation is something that they actually love because they get to sit still or lay down, but they typically will fall asleep during them. So it's usually recommended that they do like a walking meditation instead. You could. Or just, some type that's going to be stimulating enough for that Kapha type to be able to get through. And then maybe sitting on a not so comfortable pillow And then chanting and singing is like stimulating that throat chakra, which doesn't get used a lot in kapha types. They don't tend to speak a lot. I'm having a hard time just getting through this 2 hours because I am primarily a kapha type and it's hard for me to get up here and talk for 2 hours. So I'm really stimulating my throat chakra today. So these are the upcoming classes that we have. Obviously, this gives you a foundation for all of these. If you want to get into the actual nitty gritty of the tools and things that are helpful to bring into your daily life. So from here on out, I'll just be referring to, this is, balancing for Vata, this is balancing for Kapha, this is, something to add if you're a Kapha type. So the seasonal tools and rituals is coming up in October. Then following that, I'm really focusing on the Agni, on the flavors that are balancing for each dosha. We're going to be making khichdi, which is a very easy to digest meal with lentil and split lentils and, split dal and basmati rice. And you can add in different vegetables and spices. I mix it up every year the way that I make it. But it's a really good tool in Ayurveda. It's what we use during times of sickness. It's what we use when our digestion is challenged or we just need a cleanse. We don't recommend, long fasts or intense, herbal cleanse or anything like that. We recommend being gentler and doing a khichdi cleanse. So I will teach you that tool so you have it on hand. We also usually make an herbalized ghee in that class, which is super fun. Ghee is huge in Ayurveda and we talk a lot about why it's a big thing there.
Okay, I could never figure that out. It's separated store. How do you mix it up?
The ghee,
Yeah,
so it's just clarified butter. So
Yeah.
it's got the fats, risen to the top. The
Yeah.
milk solids are burned off at the bottom.
because I could never figure it out, so I threw it away.
Oh
Just so
no,
you know.
no, it should be
Figure it out.
shelf stable even if you
Yeah,
make it at
that's
home.
okay.
Mine lasted for, I don't know, I think I still have some from last year's class that I just ate like a week ago and it's still good. I don't think it's supposed to last that long, but and then those are my new classes that I just Trisha just published, and Shannon, thank you for your help with that as well. Managing stress, huge, and each of those classes I'm going to be covering a different set of herbs that corresponds with whatever the topic is. So I will be giving a little background on the dosha for those that are not familiar, go into the couple of herbs that we're covering, then give tools for managing stress and like the approach to stress from an Ayurvedic standpoint. The sensory organs, as I mentioned earlier, are hugely important. I'm really excited about that class. I haven't taught this one before, but I think it's going to explain a lot of the tools and a lot of the routines in Ayurveda more so. And we're going to be covering a couple of herbs in that one as well. Nourish and Rebuild. I originally designed this for mamas, mamas that needed some TLC, not just right after birth, but just in general. They're usually so depleted from giving to everybody else and not themselves. So anybody that's in that position that just needs nourishing, rebuilding, whether it's just a normal day for you, or if you're in a time of sickness or surgery, post-surgery or something like that, there'll be good tips and tools there. Another new one that I've never taught before is pairing essential oils and marma points. So marma points are like acupressure points. That's the equivalent in Ayurveda to our acupressure points in Chinese. And I kind of thought I was the first to think of this concept, and then I Googled it and I was like, oh no, I didn't make that up. Somebody else already thought of that. But applying essential oils to those points can have an even more dramatic effect on them. It's a good energetic pairing of things. And then we'll also be talking about a couple of herbs. And then last, but one of my favorites is the brain and the breath's effect on our brain. Not just talking about that, also talking about vagus nerve, tools for good mental health, the Ayurvedic approach to that, talking about those impressions or samskaras that we talked about earlier, and covering a couple of herbs you probably don't know that are Ayurvedic. So that's what we've got coming up. And then if you are still wondering what the heck to do, I am happy to give you guidance. You can email me at sagerootswellness.com. I can answer any questions you had about class that you think of later or just didn't share today. I'm also happy to do a consultation. There's a sign-up sheet up at the front. There's also some products that are balancing for each dosha up at the front if you're interested in that. And that's all I've got, unless you've got questions.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Bakriti, yes.
How can you remember that? I have that kind of idolize
where you are.
Where you are.
Oh, so
How you become.
thank you. So everybody got a handout, and I'm sorry, we didn't have time in this class because I added more slides, but this was an activity I did in the previous class where I had everybody partner up and try to figure out which dosha is. I don't like these quizzes because it's not thorough enough. When I do a consultation, it's like 10 pages in literally 2 hours. But it gives you an idea. I didn't want you to leave without having an idea. So if you go through that and try to circle what the primary ones are, and there are going to be times where you're going to circle all 3, like you are all of those at different times. If that's true, go ahead and choose that. But try to pick the one that applies the most out of those, and you'll kind of see at least where you are right now as far as your dosha.
But then when we go back to,
Prakriti,
like when we were young,
yeah.
think about where we were,
Mhm.
we can kind of see where.
You can, yeah, typically, if you just think about kind of your personality as a whole before you were influenced by the stress of life, you know, there's going to be a common thread there that's a little easy to see. Yeah. And if you can't, I'll help you. Yes.
So if I have, like, my daughter, if she didn't take this first class, she can.
Yes.
and it's
So
gonna be fine.
those slides that I did at the beginning on the history of Ayurveda, the 5 elements, and the pairing of the 3 doshas, like I went into them in great detail today, and I don't do that every class, but I always start each class with like 10 minutes going over the doshas, so you have an idea what I'm talking about.
I think that one is December, not October again. The date. Like,
Yes, sorry, that was supposed to say December. Thank you, Devon.
So the subtle body is.
Yes, I'm sorry.
no, it's December 15th, the Thursday.
Okay, I'll correct that on the slides. They're all on the Traditions website, where you're gonna have to go to register for the classes anyway, so you'll see the correct information there, but I'll correct that before it gets sent out to you. Any other questions?
Oh, I love it.
Yay, thank you. I threw a lot of information at you, sorry, but hopefully you got something good that you can apply at home. And if you want more, come back for the next one.
I love this.
You call those motivating.
Right.
You guys in the class are moody.
Our last video. Hold on, baby, I'll go.
I live in Coconut Creek. Know where that is? Yes. I like it there. I've been here 10 years. I'm moved from Illinois. What's that?
We're in Illinois.
What's that?
We're in Illinois.
Like Rockford area?
I lived in Fairdale. You know where there's Monroe Center, the shit little town and. Fairdale.
Yeah.
So we can just take them individually. You don't have to do.
Yes, I grew up in, it's, yeah.
Say right. Yeah.
it's lovely. I miss this one. Oh, they're kind of steep. That's it.
You have the, girl, we gonna be looking at.
I'm feeling like,
Okay, we're gonna stop.
feeling that, like, that loss of like connection.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much.
When we start the class.
How long? 1 year ago. Not that one. 1 year ago.
Are you in foundation study?
I'm ready to go. Yes, yes, that right. I will take that. First we have that storage.
Thank you all. Bye. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Okay.
See you next time.
Okay, yeah, next time. What's the next one? No, we'll be in Egypt. You going to Egypt? Yeah, can I come in your suit? You sure can. Oh, girl,
You take me.
my husband's gotta take care of the chicken. You can, yeah. Babe, it's a grocery, it's a grocery. You gotta. People like me, even though I'm a witch. It's all right.
Yeah, I think.
So, Gulfport Casino?
I said.
They have a casino, but one.
Yeah.
It's the name of the place.
Oh,
It's
I'm
not a casino. No, it's called the Golf Course Casino, but cause it's, that's how it's known. It used to be a casino many years ago. And then it's not casinos anymore, so it's just a big event area. It's more than anything. And they have dance every day of the week.
Yeah, Alzheimer's and, yeah, keep your mind sharp, yeah. I need that, I have a new mom, so I'm.
What do you say, class dancing with her?
That sounds fun. I need to nourish and rebuild class.
I'm good.
It's okay. I like everybody. I'm not.
What is it to you?
No, it's a very good.
Like what's like a vodka?
I am. a lot guy. It is.
So did I do it or did I not? What sort of a teacher or?
Oh, she's not here.
So she sent me a thing saying. I almost did it.
Sure.
That's my daughter.
Was that you or is that me?
That's my daughter.
I almost.
And quack too.
Wow.
So I've got two. like, Well, I found out for the gay festival, I walked in and I saw Trisha.
Sounds like it's
The right thing.
She was like.
a nice day.
Just, no, it's just. She wasn't doing her, just ask all questions you want, supposed to ask questions, so I asked questions, and she came up to me, she says, you're very argumentative. I said, wait, I asked a question. I asked a question, you asked me to ask questions, I had questions, so I asked questions. Because I got a lot of questions, my granddaddy taught me questions. So I asked questions, right?
Yeah. So I looked at this, I got some. So I called, I couldn't. We'll see.
Hey, no,
And then I did, I can't with them.
it's that thing,
I can't go. Okay. I do like. So, see that. Oh. Oh, but all the girls have got. Crazy face, like I'm
Maybe.
having this, right? I was so embarrassed and I was like, almost. The person's, I don't really want to see it.
so did you graduate the next?
Yeah. No, I didn't take that.
That's the one that I got.
Everybody was there.
But you took the last one. Okay.
Okay. But it's cool what happened. Gretchen,
I know, she was sitting there listening.
And here's your nose.
I know, because I talked to her, I said, what do I, I've got 4 classes. Where I.
Can you jump into the next one?
4 classes before I finish the dance, I gotta read. 4 classes. No, But everything has changed. Tricia said she's typing up some of this nothing. And now I've gotta find out. And I just go to all of it and start off. Renee's. Gina. I said. Everything that she said, I said. Send it out. No, he does, you know, so he does. Without me. I sent him, I cut and pasted it, sent it to him, all 3 4 times. Tell me. I still have it. So I said, I need. So I thought I have from foundations or. I'm taking foundation now. I got 4 like that's my God from. That from.
So it's not even the same program.
She said she's typing it up, so it's
So-
really nice.
I start the,
So I've got. Since it's gone, everything is just.
Yeah, I know. Well,
The atmosphere, the energy is something. I taped all the classes. You should hear how many times on those tapes that she kept going.
Oh,
Well, you know, Bob, how many times did she, Bob threatened to make her at her? How many times did you say that? Literally, it's on tape. My husband said, stupid little.
It's
Yeah.
it's still.
Yeah.
I
My
started
husband
November.
said, well, his classes, you got some crazy woman saying that she. Threatened to be bankrupt. I know.
This is something
She
that.
always said nasty things about me.
That's what my husband says.
Have a good night.
Hey,
Good night.
thank
Good
you.
night. She knows she got classes in Gulfport that other day. She had classes in Gulfport.
Oh, she got one.
She's renting someplace. She got 4 or 5 people.
That's it.
When-
Oh, okay.
No, let me finish. Renee. Was renting something in Gulfport and has 4 or 5 people trying to get her first one. One of my friends at Herb Society was going in. I said, no, we need to get you out of there. She didn't know. And I explained to her. So.
I thought you like herself.
Why would hell would I like someone that was mean to me? And then I didn't finish advance because she kicked me out. I asked if it was gonna. Or, you know, the other girl said, keep your head low, just ignore it, keep your head low, so you graduate. I said, no, I'm not keeping my head low, because I'm not learning what I'm supposed to be learning, what I think. Why am I gonna accept a certificate when I'm not getting the education?
I remember I went to last year.
Look. One lesson 8. And then beta, look, I got it. If you haven't noticed, I walk into everything with other things to do because I can't sit still. I know everything that she said, but I did 5 questions.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Hi, Debbie. Nice to meet you. There.
Hi, I'm
Nice to meet you.
I meant.
We have, you look really
I meant to
familiar.
ask her because
Yeah.
it's like the big old.
Learning like
that I
really
never
long
touched.
I've been in Florida 14 and a half
Thank you,
years.
honey.
I've
Thank
been
you,
in
Debbie.
California.
Appreciate you coming.
Yeah, as long as I can. I like.
Well, because I gotta go.
Are you still, are you friends still up? You're not?
No.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, nice
Drum
to meet you.
Drum circles?
Probably not.
See? We'll figure it out.
Spirited. Bye. Like, you throw me around and back, like, yeah. Like, yeah. And Thursday. Oh, no. I always lose things, thank you. I can make sure the yeah, I use everything. I always have to be triple multitasking.
We are not.
Did we stop recording? No. Stop. And. Meeting.